That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a really true first childhood memory. I have some memories that have been shared with me about things that I did when I was a child, but not so much like something that was really, really vivid for me. Well, for instance, there is a story about me. I probably would have been 3, maybe 4 years old, maybe younger. I don't know. I think it was my mom that was painting outside. She was painting some stuff around the front doorway. The story I remember is that it was my mom. And I don't know if she went inside or she just turned her back, wasn't paying attention to me, or if it was my dad, the same thing. But I took a screwdriver and decided to paint the front porch. And the story that I remember being told is that my dad wasn't very happy with that. One memory that I think I have, I think it's a memory for me. My grandparents lived on the corner of the main highway and the subdivision that we lived in. They lived on the corner. We lived down the street on an opposite corner, and it was a gravel road. It hadn't been paved. I don't know if it's ever been paved. And I used to walk from our house to my grandparents' house in the morning. And, I don't know if I spent the whole day there. If I just walked there, I walked back. And again, I wouldn't have been, but maybe 4 years old, because I could have been 5, because I think we moved to Richmond when I was 6. But I would go in, and my grandmother would ask me every time, have you had breakfast? And of course I'd had breakfast. My mom always fed me breakfast, and I would say, no. And she would fix me breakfast. And so I would have 2 breakfasts every day. But the memory that I remember, that I think I remember, was walking down there. I wanted to go down there, and it was raining. And I had my galoshes on, might have been wearing one of those yellow raincoats, and I had an umbrella. And I seem to have this memory of the wind sort of picking me up just a little bit off the ground. It pulled the umbrella out of my hand, and it went flying out across a cornfield back behind our house. And I'm pretty sure I went home. Well, those things that I'm talking about, first memories, those were in Rochelle, Illinois, but I consider where I grew up to be Richmond, Indiana. My dad was sort of getting promotions and moving from company to company. He was a chemist in a factory that put insulation on harness wires that went underneath the dash. So they were insulating copper wire. And I think in Richmond, he was working for a company called Belden Wire. I think that was Richmond. And we lived at, it's probably the only address I remember living at that I actually remember, and it was 220 Southeast Parkway. It was directly across the street from Charles Elementary School, which is where I went to school from kindergarten to 6th grade. And, it was, I enjoyed living in Richmond. I had some friends. I was active. I rode my bike everywhere. I'd ride it to the A&W root beer stand to get something to drink. There was a new McDonald's that came in, and I would ride there. If I had a dime, I could buy a McDonald's hamburger for 10 cents. A lot of kids that I went to school with lived right there in our neighborhood. So it was nice growing up there. The house, I think when we're kids, we have a certain memory about where we lived. Our house was a little tiny single floor ranch style house. I remember it had some stone on the front, but it was mostly blue painted siding, I think. Maybe white with some blue trim. Maybe that was it. But it had a garage on one end. The door sort of just a little bit to the left of center. And you walked in and immediately turned into the living room. It was 3 bedrooms. So my brother had a bedroom, and I had a bedroom. My parents had a bedroom, 1 bath. It had a fireplace, had a small dining room, had a small kitchen, and then it had a full basement that leaked a lot, flooded a lot when it rained. And it rains a lot in Indiana. And so my dad worked really hard to try to get that basement where it would stay dry at least most of the time. And he sort of made what today I guess would be called sort of a man cave. It was like a den for the family to go downstairs. The TV was down there. There was, a couch and some chairs. I think a rug over part of the floor. In the other half of the basement, he put in a pool table and a ping pong table, and he built a small area for my mom to do her sewing. She was a seamstress, and she worked at a fabric store and actually made a lot of the clothes that I wore. And there was no air conditioning. In those days in Indiana, you had a ceiling fan. You had heat because it got cold, but you didn't necessarily have an air conditioner. We had a big ceiling fan in the middle of the hall between the bedrooms that when it would kick on, you knew it was on. And I remember, sitting around the kitchen table, eating. I remember being in the dining room when family would visit or people might come over after church. It was a really, really comfortable house. And it had a back patio. The back patio was sort of flat stone with a covering. I think it was like an aluminum roof, tin roof covering, where my dad would go outside to barbecue, or we made homemade ice cream a lot. And I mean a lot. And, that was before electric ice cream makers. It was all hand crank stuff. And my brother would crank for a while, my dad would crank for a while, and my job most of the time was to sit on the ice cream tub so it didn't move. It was an important job. Somebody had to do it. I have been back to that house, and this is why I think it's so interesting what we remember about being kids. I went back to that house after I was an adult. I was doing some stuff over in Ohio, and I think I was in Dayton, Ohio, which is just across the border. And I thought, I am too close not to go back over and see if I can find this place. And, it was interesting because, we moved away from there when I was in the middle of the 7th grade. And I'm not sure I'd even been back up until this point when I was an adult. But I knew exactly how to get to that house. And it had been sold several times, I think. And it was being remodeled. Nobody was living in it at the moment. And I walked up to the door, and the guy that was remodeling it, I kind of told him who I was, why I was there. I basically just asked if he'd mind if I just walked around the outside of the house. And he invited me in to see what he was doing. And I was shocked at how incredibly tiny this house was. I mean, tiny. The living room, I don't know how we got any furniture in there. And in the dining room, I'm not sure that a table and chairs could fit there. And when I walked into the kitchen, it was like, we had a table in the kitchen, and there is no room for a table in this kitchen. And I don't know how they did it. I don't know how my mom and dad did it. But it's still probably one of my favorite places that I've lived. I guess because it's tied to happier times of my childhood, maybe. But, it really taught me a valuable lesson on how skewed our memories are across the years, and how we misremember things. And yeah, but I want to go back again, just to absorb it a little more. I've been wanting to do a video kind of like this for a while, not so much to tell a personal story about myself, but to look at how interviews are done. Typically with an interview, you have the person being interviewed looking directly at the interviewer. So the camera is off to the side, and I would say that my camera was probably off about 20 degrees, not a total 45, but about 20 degrees. And a lot of people that do interviews use two cameras. And they'll use probably two prime lenses. Like they might use a 28 or 35 millimeter lens to get that wider shot, but then use a 50 millimeter lens or even an 85 millimeter lens to get the closer in shot. And they're usually just a little bit, they're not lined up right behind each other, so they're just a little bit off. So when they zoom in, the view shifts just slightly. And then the light is generally on the opposite side from the camera. Now, back here behind me, I have these doors, and I have a large window. And I waited until the afternoon when the sun was coming down, so I had the most light coming through those areas. I added a little bit of light to get just a little bit more light on my face, but as the video progresses, because it was all done in one take, as the video progresses, you can see my face getting brighter and brighter and brighter because the sun is setting right here on this side of the house. These doors face west. And so the light kept getting brighter and brighter. Of course, I didn't notice that while I was videoing. So, little technical difficulties here and there. But instead of two cameras, because I don't have two cameras, I have one cell phone, I decided to try to do something similar with a zoom. And so every zoom is the same. It's exactly the same percentage of zoom. I moved me over on the screen just a little bit and then came down a little bit so that there is a shift, but it's not the same as having two cameras. Then the question is just, where do you make the change? It's easy to make those kind of edits, especially if you have a coughing spell or you clear your throat like I do a lot, or you're just mumbling too much and you got too many uhs and ums and whatever. You can cut that out and then make the shift. And I've toyed with the idea of doing that on the New Retired Me channel because I just do a hard cut, and it gets a little jumpy. It wouldn't be jumpy at all if I would just zoom in a little bit. But that takes time. It takes time to do that kind of editing, and I don't have that time. So the other thing is I videoed this whole thing in the cinematic mode, trying to get the area behind me sort of more blurred. And I kept all the lights off behind me to sort of keep all that in darkness, so you didn't really pay attention to the boxes and things I have stacked up on my table over here. So anyway, just a lot of kind of maneuvering to kind of get everything together, but it's interesting. It's very interesting, and I would recommend that if you are thinking about starting YouTube, I would recommend that you try something like this. Maybe not with all the fancy editing, but if you're having problems talking to the camera because you feel intimidated, move the camera off to the side and talk to the wall. I just talked to a door. I talked to a door. That was the person I was talking to was a door. And so it was like the camera didn't exist. And I had the questions ahead of time. I'd written them all down. So I just kind of waited a little bit because I knew I wanted to put them on the screen. And then, I would just sort of naturally fall into the conversation like I was having a conversation with another person. That kind of practice can help to get over the fear of the camera. The other thing I will say, just sort of as a final thing that has absolutely nothing to do with this channel or what I'm doing here, is that this is where the New Retired Me channel started as a germ in my head, to sit down in front of the camera, not necessarily with it off to the side, but just talking to the camera and telling my kids and my grandkids about my life, growing up, getting married, getting divorced, the jobs I had, the people I grew up with, the friends I've had, the friends I've lost, my religious convictions, my theological views, my political bent, the whole 9 yards, to leave a lasting legacy for them. And then I decided that might be a little too personal, and I decided I would go a different direction. But I may still try to work that in from time to time. They can watch this one. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.